Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, People First, a Strategy to Drive Change, sponsored by Management Concepts on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Tim Bowden, the General Manager of Consulting for Management Concepts, Shari Merrill, the Executive Director of Product Management for Management Concepts, Anna Malden, the Product Management Director for Leadership and Management for Management Concepts, and Lahaja Furaha, a Senior Human Capital Advisor for Management Concepts. Now, before break, we started the last two segments. We talked about individual, we talked about leaders, but then there's the bigger leadership side, right? And I'm going to start with Tim on this question, the leadership, the organization. There's a skill set that's also needed to look maybe at the 50,000 foot view or the 30,000 foot view. How should leaders kind of take that broader perspective too?
Yeah, Jason, I think the critical piece here is for leaders to maintain a systems thinking perspective about their organizations. Change can be a little bit like the butterfly effect, right? This whole notion that a butterfly flaps its wings at Tahiti and causes a tsunami in Western Europe. And, maybe that's a little overstated, but really not by much. There's this notion that changes in one part of an organization, even if they feel disconnected from a different part of the organization, when uncertainty is high, they have ripple effects, and people feel what that's like. Maybe in a part of the organization that you think is very disparate. Maybe it's the Alaska field office, and you think, changes at headquarters won't have any impact on them. But the reality is, even a small change there, people can feel in a far part of the organization, and a leader needs to keep the perspective on that. And I think they do that by some of the things we talked about earlier, and that's getting to know the motivations and passions of their people and how those passions connect to the mission of the organization, even when that mission might be changing. And how do you give them that sort of new thing to anchor on, that new North Star, for them to understand how what they do every day helps with delivering value to the constituents that you're going to get to. And right, we get this all the time. Leaders say, oh my gosh, I supervise 50 people. I can't possibly know what their motivations are. And there's a couple things I say to that. One is, we all have a lot of white space where we don't take advantage of the incidental interactions that we have. I like to think about the time I'm riding in an elevator with someone on my team, and what can I do to get to know them in that 30-second ride? Or we kind of work in an older building, so maybe a couple hours when the elevator's stuck. How can I take advantage of that time? Or maybe the walk from the parking lot. Or more importantly, how do I manage through other people? It might work with 50, but if you have 150 or 400, really the only way you can know how a change is going to ripple through your organization is to get effective at managing through others, helping them understand the value of knowing what motivates their people and how to share that, how to get that information, and how to push it back up so that you as an enterprise level leader can think critically about how changes ripple.
It's also managing, you talk about managing through other people. It's also ensuring those second level or third level managers are also doing their job to managing their people, right? Hey, tell me if there's something wrong, and how are you meeting with those folks that are in Alaska, and tell me what they're saying. Is that another piece to this puzzle?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jason. It's really, as an enterprise level leader in a major organization, your role really has to be two things. One is getting to know and building the skills in those managers who manage others. And the other is setting the stories around a culture that encourages that behavior. I was privileged enough to work in the Navy submarine community several years ago, and one of the things that they do so well is capture and retell stories that connect people throughout the organization to the mission. Everybody knows the Thresher or the Admiral Rickover stories about nuclear safety, and they drive so much of a culture there that there hasn't been an incident in over 50 years. And I think strong leaders know how to connect story of what their organization does well to inspire and motivate people who they work for, but also people they manage, and translate that culture down the organization.
Lahaja, you heard Tim mention culture in about half a dozen times. I cringe a little bit when I hear it's all about the culture. You got to change the culture. But in many ways, it's understanding and then adapting and modifying what's happening. Talk a little bit about that culture change that we know always needs to happen.
Yeah, sure. First, it's about understanding your current culture, right? So a lot of people understand their culture from a characteristic perspective, but they don't know exactly what their culture, how it's defined. And so the first part is identifying what is your current state and what is your current culture, and what are the attributes of that culture that actually hinder or enable the mission to move forward. The second step is identify where are the gaps between where your current state is and where you need to be in order to move your organization forward. So individuals within the organization understand their culture from a conceptual perspective, but not necessarily specific perspective.
Is there something that a manager could do to understand their culture better? Is it just interacting with their employees and the workers, or is there something else?
Yeah, people understand their culture conceptually, as I mentioned earlier. It's really understanding, there are tools that they can use. There's qualitative tools and there's quantitative tools to gather the right data so they can define exactly what their culture is.
And defining that culture is so important to moving forward and changing it and improving it. I think that people lose track that we just have to make this change because it has to happen. This has been just a fascinating conversation, and we're going to do something a little different now. We're going to move into what we're going to call the lightning round. This is like a game show, but not really a lot of games or shows. But I'm going to ask each of you a separate question, and I'm going to ask you to keep your answer to about 30 seconds or less, or maybe a little more for Tim. But so we'll start with Lahaja, since when we talk about the people-centered workplace, remind us again, what does that mean? 30 seconds or less.
So people-centered workplace is really helping leaders understand that they're putting their people first, right? They're breaking the conventional notion of putting leaders first and putting the people first and helping them understand where their values connect to the organization.
All right, Anna, when you talk about the missing link about driving successful leadership, what is that missing link?
Yeah, I really think there's two critical factors. One is follow through and accountability. Leadership development, it's like an exercise regimen. Yeah, you can hit the snooze button some mornings, but you got to get up more often than not so you can stay in shape. And leadership development is exactly just like that. You got to flex those muscles so you can continually build and grow on the progress that you're making. And then the second thing is it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. We've talked a lot today about how it needs to be about the individual and how that really feeds organizational success. And so organizations, as they're investing in leadership development, they need to offer a breadth of opportunities, but also there's the fact that people need to own their learning. A lot of it has to be self-driven between those opportunities that the organization provides.
I think you make a key point, own your learning. I think a lot of people think, well, they're not giving me that opportunity. Tim, here we go, under 30 seconds. How do you become a better leader? What's the advice you have there?
I think getting honest feedback can be hard when you're a leader. It's lonely at the top. Countless studies have shown that the higher you get in organizations, the harder it is to get real feedback. Management concepts, we use three kind of tactics. One is 360 feedback, which allows you to get multi-rater feedback from anonymous and confidential sources to improve your skills. The second, I would say, is invest in building peer relationships. Peers are often your best mirror because there's no risk and there's no competition involved, and they just want to honestly and genuinely help you get better. And the third way is consider getting an outsider executive coach. Executive coaches are professionals who help you do structured self-discovery to help you know what you need to get better at, and then walk with you on that journey of improvement.
All right, Shari, you're going to get the last comment. You're going to get the last lightning round question of the day. What is success? How do you improve chances for success?
It boils down to three key things: communication and transparency, stakeholder engagement, and leadership alignment and commitment to that change. Ultimately, it's in order to move your agency from the planning phase to the execution phase, you have to be aware and recognize that there's going to be some resistance to that change. And it's about how you change those resistors into advocates.
All right, great advice, great conversation. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time for today. You've been listening to the panel discussion, People First, a Strategy to Drive Change, sponsored by Management Concepts on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I've been your host, Jason Miller. I'd like to thank my guests today, Tim Bowden, the General Manager of Consulting for Management Concepts, Shari Merrill, the Executive Director of Product Management for Management Concepts, Anna Malden, the Product Management Director for Leadership and Management at Management Concepts, and Lahaja Furaha, a Senior Human Capital Advisor for Management Concepts. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Management Concepts.